Now, moving on to our first keynote presentation of the day. It is on circular economy myth-busting, a shared understanding presented by Professor Kim Poldner, Circular Business at the Hague University of Applied Sciences, and she holds a PhD from the University of St. Gallen, Switzerland. Duration of this keynote will be 15 minutes. Ladies and gentlemen, with a round of applause, please welcome Professor Kim Poldner on stage.
Slides are too far back.
Okay. Sorry. Can you maybe put this one a little bit up? Thank you so much. I'm Dutch and tall, so that is why, of course, we need to tweak a little bit the electronics here. Thank you so much for having me. And while I wait for my slides, there they are. Excellent. So my name is Kim Poldner, and I would love to introduce myself shortly in a bit of a different way than how I've just been introduced by the lovely moderator of today's conference. I've learned that the Maori in New Zealand actually introduced themselves according to their ancestors and the place where they were born. So when I'm looking at where I come from in the south of my country, the highest, not the highest mountain, but the highest building in my country is the St. Jan's Cathedral in 's-Hertogenbosch. So the Maori in New Zealand actually look at the highest mountain in their country, close to where they were born, as a place of reference to ground them in where they're actually coming from, where they're originating from. So in Holland, of course, just like in Bangladesh maybe, we don't have high mountains, right? So I chose to think about this cathedral in my place of birth. Luckily, we have a beautiful big river also close to my birthplace, which is the River Maas. So that is the one you see depicted here on my slide. Next to that, I've looked into the meaning of my surname, again, according to Pepea tradition from the Maori in New Zealand. And my surname is Poldner, which is quite an unusual name in my country, but you can derive it back from Söldner, which means warrior in German. So I consider myself as a warrior for more regenerative, circular, sustainable futures. And then, last but not least, my first name is Kim, and that actually means horizon. So if there's anything I'd like you to take away from my 15 minutes of fame here on stage today, it is that I'd like to offer you a horizon for what the future might look like. This model from Bill Sharp is the 3 horizon model, and it shows very nicely how we're trying to transition from a more linear economy, a business as usual economy, to a much more circular or regenerative economy, a viable future. And it also shows, it's basically an X curve, as I would call it, but there's also sort of a middle horizon, the blue line that you see in this image. So the first horizon is that business as usual horizon. The second horizon is the blue line, is like the middle of how we're transitioning towards that more viable future, the third horizon in the model. And I'll get back to those 3 horizons later on. So just a definition to get us all on the same page and understand better what a circular economy is all about. The circular economy is an economic system that is waste-free. We've already heard the previous speakers talk about it, but also resilient by design, mimicking natural ecosystems in the way we organize our society and businesses. By following circular strategies and principles, company can ensure the highest level of economic and societal value is attained while minimizing planetary impacts. And I think this concept of multiple value creation, not just striving for economic value, but also for social an ecological value, but there's a range of other values when we're looking at the fashion industry. Of course, aesthetic value is a big one, but you can also think about educational value, societal value. There are many, many types of value we can think about when you want to create a business of the future. Talking about the circular economy, we cannot circumvent this beautiful image developed by the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which I call the butterfly model. Because if we're looking at the middle of the model as the body of the butterfly and the two wings, the two circles around it, this is really a key figure that teaches us a lot about what the circular economy is all about. What is important to know here, and we've heard already a lot about the different R strategies of reuse, reduce, recycle, but basically this model shows you the technical, on the right side, the blue circles, the technical materials that we can recycle and reduce and basically put back in the loop, as well as on the green, the left side, the green wing of the butterfly, the biological cycles, right? So these are really interesting to keep in mind. And I think when we're talking about garments, we're, at the moment at least, basically mainly looking at technical materials and how we can bring them back in the loop. Another model, or basically the X-curve that I started my talk with, is coming back here in the drift transition curve. So we need to keep in mind that when we're transitioning to a circular economy, it doesn't happen overnight, right? So we really need to take time, but also take a lot of good efforts to get there, and it will require a bit of time, basically. So this model, we see again the old regime, the old system that we're stuck in, and the new regime that we're trying to build as we move towards more circular futures. And what always really strikes me in this model is that at the moment we're putting a lot of effort in optimizing the current system, okay? So when we're looking at the blue dots in this figure, we see that the bigger dots, that's where we put a lot of money, resources, energy, etc. And we're really working on optimizing the current system, the current business as usual practices. So the question would be, how can we move away from that? How can we support building that new regime, that new system that we all want to build? So when the conference organizers proposed to me this title for my speech, Circular Economy Myth-Busting, I was a little bit hesitant because I always want to focus on the positive aspects of the circular economy. But here I am talking to you about certain myths that are going around in the world on circular economy. And the first one is that circular economy is all about recycling. We've heard already this morning from previous speakers that this is on top of the priority list. This is on top of the agenda. But actually, again, we are talking about a range of different R strategies that can be implemented, should be implemented when we're looking at what the circular economy is all about. And then we see in this nice figure that the R strategy of recycling is at the very bottom of the list, of the hierarchy. Okay, so recycling is great and we need to continue doing it, but I think it would be very interesting to explore which other R strategies that are higher up in the hierarchy would be much more beneficial for all of us in transitioning to the circular economy. And in this particular figure, the highest R strategy is rethink. And that means that we really need to rethink our business practices, our supply chains, our collaborations. And that requires much more from us than just focusing on the next new technology to be able to recycle the waste that we're creating. The second myth that I'd like to talk about is that it somehow sometimes really comes across as if the circular economy is all about, reducing impact on the environment. But if we're going back to the knowledge that we've gained from the Cradle to Cradle book, this is written by William McDonough and Michael Braungart, we see here that, of course, the different cradle-to-cradle criteria, the basic principles, are very much about material innovation, material health, reutilization, solar power income. We've heard already about it. It's so important to run our factories on renewable energy, for example. But I've highlighted here on the bottom of this overview that celebrating diversity and social fairness is crucial. And of course, here in Bangladesh, we know how that works. We know how to treat the workers right. But when we're moving towards a circular economy discourse, we should not forget about this, okay? So when we're thinking about implementing the different R strategies, it's very, very important to keep in mind that this is not just about the environment and positive ecological impact. It's just as much about celebrating diversity, about honoring workers' rights and social fairness. Let us move on to myth number 3, which I call rapid return on investment, okay? Circular economy, as I said earlier, doesn't go overnight. We need a long-term strategy. Just like it's very valuable to look back at our ancestors, from the Pepeha tradition that I started my talk with, it's also important to take into account future generations. So if you think that investing a little bit of money or even a lot of money, like we're doing in my own country, in the Netherlands, will give you a fast transition to the circular economy, this is not the case, okay? And many companies in Holland are struggling with that because they think it's too much investment, too much money for them to actually make that step. So that long-term perspective is so crucial in getting where we want to be in the future with the circular economy. An example that I brought is a new circular department store that recently opened in The Hague, in my country, where they have really implemented a lot of beautiful R strategies, like, for example, resale, but also repair, etc. And they've opened in March, so when you're in the Netherlands, please visit TOMO, which is short for tomorrow. And I think it's a great example of moving forward in the circular economy, and they have big ambitions. They want to scale in the Netherlands, but also beyond with this new department store concept. The fourth myth that I wanted to shortly touch upon is consumer consciousness. In 2020, the first year of the COVID pandemic, there was an increase in 37% online on a search platform list with regards to the topic of sustainability. So we're really seeing in the Netherlands, but also in other countries, mainly in Western countries, a rising awareness of consumers for example, secondhand textiles and sustainably produced textiles. And this is very positive and very hopeful, and at the same time, we need to be very aware of the rebound effect that occurs. Okay, so when we're looking at secondhand platform, Vinted, for example, that is really becoming huge in Europe, we're seeing that a lot of people that used to maybe buy from fast fashion brands are now buying in the same speed from this platform, secondhand fashion. And we call that the rebound effect, because then maybe in the end, the ecological footprint is not less than what was intended, right? One of the research projects that I work on is called Next Fashion Retail, where we really see the retailers as the influencers for customers to learn more about sustainable fashion and also to influence them in purchasing more sustainable fashion. And we really see that even though there is a large group of customers in the Netherlands and beyond that are really interested and keen in buying sustainable fashion, a large portion of the customers are not yet informed and don't know enough to make that conscious purchase. And then myth number 5 is that technology is the solution. I heard several speakers this morning already talk about, as long as we invest in technology, we can, make it to the circular economy. And on the one hand, that is true, because technology is super important. But most of the technology that we need, for example, when we're talking about mechanical and chemical recycling, it's already out there. We just need to use it and implement it, right? So I challenge you to look beyond the technological revolution. And for example, think about that at the moment with technologies such as recycling technologies in the garment industry, we're recycling and we're cleaning up the mess, right? So we're cleaning up the mess, recycling textile fabrics that are actually not made in a good way. So it would be wonderful to look, for example, at the new innovations that are happening in the world regarding bio-based textiles, making textiles, such as this PhD student that graduated last month in Wageningen University, looking at maybe we can design fabrics that biodegrade by itself, right? And I know that H&M is already working also with these new innovative materials in their collections. So, what can you do to transition to a more circular and regenerative future? I think what is really important is to look locally and nationally at the materials that you can use, that grow in abundance. So I know that polyesters are important, but maybe we can also look at other types of materials. For example, in the Netherlands, we're now growing flax. We're now growing hemp for textiles. And that means that you can make the supply chains much shorter, which is I think, very restorative for the planet. And talking restorative, that's another R strategy that I think is more important even than the highest R strategy that we know from the circular economy hierarchy. So restore, rejuvenate, replenish, what we have also broken in the system. So designing a product that can restore ecosystems, like for example, the big carpet company in the Netherlands called Interface has built a factory as a forest. How interesting can that be? So literally the ways of making your products, building your factories, that it functions as a forest, because nature is the biggest inspiration for us to do better. I'll finish quickly my slides. So building on the resilience of a diverse community to ensure social inclusion in the CE, I'm wearing today this beautiful belt embroidered by women in the favela of Rio de Janeiro when I was living in Brazil for some time. So always keep in mind that we really need to think about that social diversity that I spoke about. And then, of course, collaborating. Collaboration has been mentioned before. It's so important. But how can we look at that multiple value creation, right? Where money is not just the end goal in itself. And then regenerate inner ecosystems while transforming outer ecosystems. Many of you might be familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals. Well, right now in the Netherlands, we have a large discussion within higher education where we're looking at training our students, our master students, into also combining them with the inner development goals. Because this transformation requires a lot of inner work from all of us as well. It's not just what we're doing in the outside world. A great example is Elvis & Cressy in the UK, a sustainable fashion brand that has moved completely towards regenerative agriculture. So they have now a property in the UK where they grow their own materials, which is super interesting, I think. And basically to end with, again, this horizon model that I hope you take away from my talk. It's very challenging, of course, for us to make decisions in the process towards a more circular and regenerative economy. So we can look one side, we can look the other side, but ask yourself today, am I really contributing to a solution and to a viable future, or am I doing maybe a little bit better than before, keeping the current system intact? Thank you.